believe I'm on your Facebook page. You got your coffee?
You are on my Facebook page, but this is your show. I am the Ed McMahon to your Johnny Carson.
Okay, all right, wonderful. How are you?
I'm good. I'm feeling productive. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling.
All right.
Since we last spoke, I've done I think about 11 interviews with different people, so I've a lot of information in my mind. So
yeah,
I'm very excited.
All right, wonderful. Well, it's good to be on and discussing this book and the material within it, and linking the discussion to the practical realities of our lives and the lives of those folks around us. I want to begin our discussion with a bit of I don't know if disclosure is the right word, but I do want to share something that I participate in these discussions as much to get the word out as I do because I have an interest. I have a personal interest, and I'd like to share that personal interest, and that is that to the extent that I find myself in discussion with you, Matt, about this book, and to the extent that folks engage us, share, share their comments and questions with us, it gives me an opportunity, excuse me, to become familiar with the book and its contents and so on, and then of course to expose gaps in understanding, either those gaps that I might possess as far as this reading goes, or gaps that are out there, about this particular book. So my aim is true, Matt.
Yeah,
that's where I'm coming from. All right. So having said that, Matt, I just kind of want to lay out, and remind the audience how it is we do this. We'll begin with a discussion of the contents of Chapter 1, Section 4, and the title of Chapter 1, Section 4 is the fetishism of commodities and the secret thereof. Okay, and of course, Marx has a particular definition that will be made clear as far as the word. Okay. Anyway, so we'll talk about that stuff, and then we'll link it to things having to do with the real circumstances of our lives, and particularly those that surround us at the moment. And then we'll close with discussion. Hopefully, we'll have some questions. Welcome, Esteban. We're talking about Kapital, Volume 1, Chapter 1, Section 4. Okay, so look forward to your exchange and participation. All right, wonderful. Well, let's get started, Matt. And then, by the way, just before I forget, we'll close with a sharing of a portion or of a complete poem. I don't know, Matt. The decision is yours, such that we bring closure to this particular discussion. Yeah?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So, fetishization. I suppose I should begin, or we should begin with a quote, and then we'll take it from there, and we'll talk about what the implications of this quote, particularly as far as the very language of the things that we've been reading in this book. And as I said, the title of this particular chapter is The Fetishism of Commodities and the Secret Thereof.
Yeah.
And I'd like to share a quote, a few lines from this particular section. It says, "In order, therefore, to find an analogy, we must have recourse to the mist-enveloped regions of the religious world. In that world, the productions of the human brain appear as independent beings endowed with life and entering into relation both with one another and the human race. So it is in the world of commodities with the products of men's hands. This I call the fetishism, which attaches itself to the products of labor so soon as they are produced as commodities, and which is therefore inseparable from the production of commodities. What is signaled in this particular quote, and really the function of this whole chapter, is to draw a conclusion to the preceding sections of chapter 1, where the properties within commodities and the property that is a commodity, or the property that is a set of commodities within a particular political and economic context. This particular chapter and discussion of fetishization or fetishism, right, gives Marx an opportunity to communicate to us in this particular section the kind of hocus pocus, the hoc est corpus, takes place.
Yeah.
As far as the commodity and how we misrecognize, how it is we come to misrecognize the very properties and the very bit of properties within larger properties. Matt, do you want to?
Well, I mean, I think for our listeners, like, how do we connect this to to our lives as we live them, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I want everyone to imagine, like, they're very hungry and they don't have any money. They don't have any cash on them. They've lost their cards. They don't have any access to money, and they are outside of a restaurant, right? And along comes a bear, right? Now the bear also doesn't have any money, right? And the bear is also very hungry. All right. So what the bear would do would be walk into, or somehow manage to get into the restaurant, go directly to the kitchen and start eating food. That's how the bear would handle this issue of hunger. Now, a human being being very hungry and being outside this restaurant will not do that. What the human being instead will do is go outside in front of the restaurant, and they will start to sing. They will start to they will tell jokes. They will find a way to amuse other human beings, so those human beings may give them money, so they can then take that money, go inside, and buy a sandwich, right? Because there's all these steps and things in between the person and the sandwich that's being produced, that would actually feed them, right? And this essentially is the commodity fetish. This is the thing that stands between you and the things you need in life, and the things that other people are producing that could materially benefit you, right? So somebody is taking, they're grinding up some meat, they're making a salad, they're breaking some eggs. These are things. This is their service that they could potentially provide to you, but it's being mitigated. There's something standing in between you and them. Yeah. It's not a physical thing. It's not a physical thing it's not a real actual physical barrier. What it is instead is this commercial barrier that mitigates all the relationships that we have, not just to the world around us, but actually between each other, right? Because let's say I work in the back and I'm a short order cook, and it is in my I'm compelled that I want you to eat because I see you're suffering, and it makes me suffer. Your suffering is bringing me suffering, right? And I can't justify your suffering to myself. You shouldn't be suffering this way. I want to give you this food, but I can't, right? Now a bear lives outside of the commodity fetish. A bear is a bear, and the bear will go and eat. But you and I are not so dissimilar to bears in that we have stomachs, and that we have digestive tracts, and that we have
you get hungry.
We get hungry. We have blood sugar counts.
Yeah.
We have all these things that are not so different from bears, and yet a bear is a quote unquote dumb animal, and we are the most brilliant species on earth, and yet we will not walk to the back and eat a sandwich. We will instead have 5 different steps in order to prove that we are worthy to eat this sandwich.
Yeah.
And we think this makes us intelligent. We think this separates us from bears and squirrels and dogs and other animals that when they're hungry, they go eat.
Yeah.
But because we're so much smarter than them, we have to create all these barriers between getting hungry and eating.
I'm interested in talking about this mitigation that you're talking about, and I'm interested also to address, the steps involved, the 5 steps, as you put it, or however many steps there happen to be, in the consumption and in the production of any particular commodity. And one of the things that I'm interested to do as far as this goes is first ask ourselves the question: why is it important, or why would Marx have found it important in this particular book to talk about this mitigation? What's, why ought we to know this? That's the first question that I'd like us to consider, and whose answer will give us an opportunity then to talk about those things that we can perceive and that are taking place before us, and then also to talk about those things that are taking place before us. In fact, to talk about those things and the contexts in which we ourselves find ourselves, and miss and that whose presence and whose reality, whose circumstance escapes our attention. Why? No. And so why do you suppose, Matt, Marx found it necessary to begin with a discussion of, these mitigating processes?
Well, I mean, Marx wrote about very, very, poetically and very, very. I mean, this particular section. I mean, some of the stuff's very dry, and other stuff's like very kind of interesting. But the history part's very exciting.
Yeah.
This part is very. It's not metaphysical. It's material. It's based on things that are actually there. But it's got a lot of flourishes. He talked about the secret and the this and the that, and it's very. I don't know. It reminded me a lot of just reading this chapter reminded me of this movie when I was a kid, The Secret of Nim. Like it had that kind of vibe about it, right?
Yeah.
It's got that vibe of talking about like mysticism and the this and that. But what he's describing are lies, are the lies that tell you that because you don't act as that bear, right?
Yeah.
That you are civilized. That you are, that you are modern, that you are functioning within, this grand social contract. I mean, there's a number of ways to express this kind of thing, but essentially, because you would starve before you would steal, right? Is a display of your character, essentially, ethics, civics, what you owe to the rest of society. Starve. If you can't, if he shall not work, shall not eat, starve, right? Which again predates capital. I mean, the concept of he who shall not eat, work, shall not eat is a very old, concept. It's it's in the Bible, but it's just way before that too.
Yeah.
It's this kind of this demand that you shall serve your betters or you shall die, that we end up internalizing, right? And I think Marx, who's writing from the perspective of calling for a proletarian revolution, is not one to is not one to propagate that. And in fact, there's demands in a set. I mean, it's very straightforward. I mean, he's saying that we need to have a proletarian revolution, so therefore he's going to confront the basic reading of society that we obey the rules of capital because we are good citizens and we have good ethics and we are doing what we're supposed. We're doing our part in a great society kind of stuff. So that's why Marx had to confront the ideas that we have and really show It's not, because it's not just about the ideas. It's ideas and it's not. Since we have these ideas, we go along with the program, right? So, like for instance, there's a security guard standing outside many different places of commerce, but not all places of commerce, right? They can call the cops. Cops show up pretty quickly, but not all places of commerce have like an armed guy there, because for the most part, we go along with the rules. For the most part, we go along with it either out of fear or we really actually believe, oh, this is right. It's right to do things this way. And so he had to confront those ideas, just as we today have to confront these ideas. We have to confront the idea that of he who shall not work shall not eat, and this is, to be quite honest with you, is not just a something that exists in the general public. This exists within most Marxists. Most Marxists will tell you today that if you can't work, you shouldn't eat, or they won't say it that way, but they have some variation of the idea that, well, a socialist revolution is not about people getting things for free. It absolutely is about things we get people for free. In an era of automated production, it absolutely is a baseline amount of getting things for absolutely free that you did absolutely nothing for. Absolutely. It absolutely is, in my opinion. And we have to break that ideology that, you can't just be sitting around, well, who the hell are you to tell anyone if they can sit around or not? Like, who made you the hall monitor? I mean, most people in the world in general, and certainly within kind of left organizations, very much are a bunch of hall monitors, who need to have their sashes ripped off. But now that's not Marx, that's Matt Sedillo. That's
Yeah. Well, you're talking about as we're talking about the mitigating circumstances of our existence. Those of us who would keep ourselves from quote unquote stealing, the bread that is in the kitchen. And as we talk about that, of course, you shed light on, Matt, the internalization, and I can't help from turning to my own interests, generally in history and, of course, in sociology, to make sense of this particular observation that we happen to be addressing at the moment, that those of us who find ourselves, at the self-checkout, for instance, whether or not we're thinking about the camera, that has cast its vision upon us as we pull out our credit card or our debit card, and as we bag, whatever particular commodity we happen to be buying at the time, we do so in a very compliant and a very submissive, and we do so very compliantly and very submissively. We won't steal what we have, or I don't know. I've never really used those devices, but I see people faithfully, registering each one of the particular items that they've come to the particular store to purchase. Those folks have internalized their place in society, their role in society, their function within a particular economic exchange. And for me, that's very interesting. For me, that's very interesting because there's a set of preceding socialization practices in school, in church, in the family, and the different institutions in which we find ourselves that culminate in these particular moments. They culminate in these particular moments, and then they allow the economic system to reproduce itself such that not only do those folks admonish their children, if they happen to steal something from the store, right? On account of all those socializations that take place and that culminate in a particular moment in a particular store, but then by way of those kids' upbringing, and we're focusing now, of course, on children, by way by way of the ways in which those children are raised, they too will do the same thing. And then, of course, the economy reproduces itself both across space and across time. I don't know if you want to interject here. I've got, I can keep on going. I just I want to know if what you think about this.
Well, I think that I think that across space and time throughout generations, we are told to do things a certain way, and we do them, and we're very compliant with it, and we have a morality that is geared around our own exploitation. We have a morality that is geared to make us suitable for our own exploitation. And the really horrible part about this is that not only are we suitable for our own exploitation, we actually pay to be trained to be suitable for exploitation. Because when you think about all the social services that exist in society, right? Schools, roads, highways, etc., all public institutions, those come from the tax base, right? So we are workers. We get our wages. Our wages are a huge portion of our what we actually produce is just stolen from us, and that is what the capitalist keeps. And we don't even think about it that way, but that's really what's happening. But then after that, the government takes money out of our taxation and it provides these social services. Now, I don't have an issue with that. I mean, that's fine. But the fact of the matter is that those social services are given to us, and we don't all get government jobs at the end of it. We end up mostly working in what's called the private sector. So essentially, the private sector is having this enormous amount of social wealth essentially just handed to them because by through the public institutions that train us to be able to know how to read, write, etc., that we can work for them and when we go to work for them, we are only paid a pittance of what we actually produce. So even if you're being paid really well, if you're being paid like say $200,000-$300,000, that means you're actually producing probably $5 million worth of value for your employer, right? Whatever that ratio may be. You're producing a certain amount of whatever. So that's likely the case. If you're being paid $15 an hour, you're producing $45 with an hour worth. If you're being paid whatever it is you're being paid, you are producing far more for the company that employs you in a capitalist system than you're actually being compensated for it. Otherwise, the company that is hiring you will go out of business. If they pay more than they will go out of business, right? So because that's the way the whole system is. So they could be good people, they could be horrible people, they could call their mother on a regular basis, they could be neglectful and terrible. That does not matter. What matters is that this is how this system works. If they are generous, then they go out of business. Or not even generous is the wrong word. If they actually were to pay you what you produce, they would quickly go out of business because that is not how the capitalist system works.
There's no exchange value then in our commoditized existence. The broker, the capitalist, right, will be unable to make a cut for himself, or she will be able to make a cut for herself. And so, as we read in preceding sections of this particular chapter, it's a no sum game for the capitalist. And so, of course, capitalism doesn't reproduce itself. I'm always I'm always taken by these observations, particularly the sociological significance of this particular discussion. And I think about it historically, when I have opportunity to engage in discussions such as this with students, for instance, I share, and particularly when I am in a class with Chicana and Chicano students, I share that some 100 years ago, our forebears, our ancestors, engaged in the first revolution of the 20th, and one of the fundamental aspects of that revolution was that civil war, that violent, tumultuous moment in Mexican history, was the elimination of debt. I of course always share stories about my grandfather was a boy during the Mexican Revolution, and his older siblings participated in the revolution, and the motivation behind that participation, as my grandfather shared with me, was to eliminate the system of debt in which the system of debt to which their family had been obliged by the political and economic circumstances of the time. And it's interesting because, of course, we're talking about a moment in history that is well over 100 years ago. And capitalism is such, its power is such, its hegemony is such, right, that it reproduces itself across space and across time, such that the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren and perhaps even the great-great-grandchildren of that generation of people, that took up arms to eliminate debt, are themselves found in debt, and of course I'm talking about my students at this point, are themselves found in debt, now of course not to the Mexican bourgeoisie, but to the bourgeoisie and the capitalist class, the banking system here in the United States. It's a very peculiar, interesting way to think about it. Of course, the debt in my students' case is, as you point out, they are paying into a system so that they can be exploited later on. Not unlike the historical circumstances that afflicted their ancestors.
Well, so think about this, right? So, like, I mean, okay. So again, so let's say there's somebody in a classroom that's saying something very, very interesting, right? Now, let's say for whatever reason, a bear could suddenly understand whatever language this information was being communicated in, right?
Yeah.
The bear would simply enter the room. A human being, on the other hand, is going to enroll in the class, obtain a student loan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, in order to enter into this classroom and hear this information that is useful or interesting or delights them for whatever reason, right? They're going to have to have this relationship mitigated again between this person who likely, it varies from individual to individual, but an individual who probably likely just wants to convey these interesting ideas they have and would love to share them, generally speaking, because they work hard on them. They composed them, they synthesized them out of all this different information they took in. They read 20 books to produce their own book, and also based upon their own life experience and observations and reading source materials and going to and doing oral histories and all kinds of things that went into the production of this interesting thing they have to say, of this piece of information that is interesting and unique and no one has said this before. They want to share that with people, right? Other people who have interest in this topic because of whatever life circumstances made them also interested in this, they want to hear this. And yet we have all these barriers in between this communication of information. This is the way we organize society. This is the commodity fetish. This is the thing that this is like a film. It's an invisible layer that sits between us. It sits between the person who lost their wallet and needs a sandwich and they're standing outside there singing for their supper. It stands between a student and a professor who might want to learn something. Even the role of student professor, it sits between one person who was interested in information and another person who has composed some information. It sits between all these different people at every facet and gear in society. There is this thing where somewhere there has to be this circumstance. Now, who is really making money off the production of the professor's statements and bullet points and gathering of other texts? Who's really making money? Is it the professor? The professor gets paid well. They can have a comfortable life. But who really makes money? It's the university. It's the university that makes money. It's
funders and
funders.
Funders.
It's funders and their funders, right?
Yeah.
They're the ones that are really making money off this relationship between you saying something between your mouth and your students' ears, right? There is somebody out there collecting coins, like Super Mario or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's like somebody out there like collecting like, you know, money out of between the time you speak and it hits your students' ears. The money men have collected their share somehow, some way. And that's the commodity fetish that exists in throughout all our society.
Yeah, that's our inattention to this reality, and our inattention to the fact that this is a consequence of a set of historical circumstances. It's that inattention that is the fetish. It's that misrecognition that keeps us from understanding things, this chemistry about which Marx talks in one of the other paragraphs of this particular section. So anyway, I think that I think that we, for the moment anyway, I think that we might have exhausted one of the first things that I wanted to address with you, and I see that
I could talk about bears all day, but
welcome, Karina. I see that you're on. Also, San is on. Welcome, San. San shares something. Why don't we get to San's? And let's see. We have Esteban asks, Matt, capital implies order through fear. Mm-hmm. Well, certainly, I'll take a shot at this, Matt, and then please, chime in. Of course, fear is a fundamental component in the submission of people to an economic system. We learned about it. We read about it at the, and we discussed it in our first meeting when we, our first Facebook meeting, when we talked about the processes of primitive accumulation. But as we talk now about fetishization, and if I ask Esteban to consider what Matt was talking about as far as our internalization of a set of ideologies, capitalism at some point ceases to be about fear, ceases to be about terror and terrorism, and capitalism, at least when we misrecognize the circumstances of our existence, capitalism is also about our acquiescence, submission, and acceptance of these exploitative relationships as natural, and even on the surface as not exploitative. Matt?
I think that that when we talk about fear, we're talking about capital's primary relationship with the state. Now, sometimes they hire, there's been episodes in U.S. history and certainly throughout the world where private goon squads are hired to do things, to carry out like violence, like and ones of note. Not just like deputizing some local fascists. The Pinkerton Agency was an enormous union operation for decades, right? Today we see Securitas and a few other things, right? But the primary instrument of fear, the primary bully stick of the capital is the state itself, the state apparatus, anyways. So, the cops and the FBI, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's true. I think capital does rule by shame in a kind of way, right? You should be ashamed, like don't do this one. But the capital themselves are very ineffective at shaming people. They're very ineffective. Like, I think the biggest example of this is piracy. Piracy, digital piracy, film piracy. They always run these commercials like, piracy is wrong, you're stealing, and nobody cares. Nobody cares. Like, people still keep going, people keep saying, because nobody feels bad for MGM or for Paramount or for Dana White in the UFC or for boxing like Bob Arum or something. Nobody cares. Nobody feels bad about taking from them. Nobody feels bad about taking from these giant entities. So what they end up doing is telling you like, hey, you think you're just stealing from big corporation. I'm a grip. I'm a sound guy. You're stealing from me. Da, 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 da. So they use that to try and be more effective, and maybe that has a little more effect on people. The primary thing that they do is though they work through other cultural institutions that also function inside the economy, right? So like the clergy, the education system, all kinds of people like that. These kind of people who would control, I don't want to say the exact, we call it the 10 commanding heights of morality. Those institutions are primarily the ones that educate us that it is wrong to take and steal, and we got to whether you're stealing from that stealing from a giant corporation is the same thing as stealing from your mother, right? Yeah. They're the ones that really kind of convey that information to us. The school teachers, the kindergarten teachers, the clergy, the priests, etc. Those are the people that convey to us that it is always wrong to steal. That is always wrong to this. Whether you're stealing from a billionaire or you're stealing from your uncle, it's just always wrong, right? Yeah. So they're the ones that they kind of convey to us this kind of universal morality around these issues that end up making us subservient to Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and the Walton family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's much more those kind of factors than it is Bill Gates getting on television and tell Jeff Bezos getting up and saying like, I'm Jeff Bezos, I am your billionaire, I love you. People don't really buy into that too much. But and they never have. Like there's a reason why the earliest tycoons were referred to at the time and to this day as robber barons. I mean, These people were deeply hated. They were deeply, deeply hated. And I don't think there's as much deep hatred today for like the barons of today as there was then. But there is definitely not this like love. Zuckerberg can't come on Facebook and tell you, please don't steal from me and like not get laughed at. I mean, this guy can't even come on and have a barbecue without getting laughed at. Yeah. There is still a level of contempt for the billionaires. There's a level of contempt for these individuals on an individual level that they couldn't come make a moral plea to you. So that's done through other factors. Yeah. But the biggest thing when we talk about fear, now that's the state. That's the state apparatus. That's the government entities that have the legal right to kill you or to cage you should you not be in compliance with these laws that ultimately benefit Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, so there's this discussion of culture and those ideologies that correspond to culture that distinguish us from the other animals in the animal kingdom. It's what makes us human beings as opposed to bears, right? And so for as much as we pat ourselves on the back for being at the top of the animal kingdom, or at the top of the pyramid as far as the animal kingdom is concerned, right? There are a set of things that we have internalized that function to ensure that apex, that point at the top of the pyramid, is itself divided in particular ways, and at the very top of this particular pyramid is the Jeff Bezos or the Zuckerbergs or the Bill Gates of the world, right? And so anyway, so
I would think yes, I completely agree, but I also think that we're at the top of the pyramid, but we're also being at the top of the pyramid and all these things, it makes us act in a way that the point of the bear was that we act in a way far more irrational than the bear. The bear is acting in irrational coordinates. I mean, the shortest line between any 2 points is a straight line. You know what I'm saying? The bear is a lot smarter than us because the bear understands I'm hungry and there's a sandwich back there.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah.
We're so smart that we're idiots. We don't understand the sandwich back there. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. Yeah. I got to go out there. I got to go in my car. I got to get my guitar. I gotta sing, I gotta like write, I gotta get like a sign and like write out like, hey, here are my circumstances. Please pay me for playing music so that I can get this piece of paper, go in there and buy a sandwich.
Yeah.
And we think that makes us smart. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So Gilbert joins us as well. Welcome, Gilbert. I want to now talk not about the immaterial realities and circumstances.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Let's address this. Let's just address this. Zahn says we are failed animality. I mean, I think that's funny. You know, like failed states, we're failed animals. We
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, better not choke. Anyway, so we've had this discussion, right, about the immaterial realities of our existence. And by way of this discussion of the fetishism, we also have an opportunity to learn not just about, you know, these immaterial things, but the very material circumstances, of our existence in this particular historical moment. And of course, this is made possible, right, by way of Marx's own attention to the material circumstances of capitalism in the mid-19th century. So, and we've already learned, for instance, we've learned about commodities contain material properties that, you know, a commodity, be it a pen, you know, a cup of coffee or whatever it happens to be, contains within it value. And Marx, you know, engages in a chemistry, if you will, of commodities in order to make visible and tangible the very properties that are contained, the very quote unquote chemical properties that are contained in these commodities. And of course, he talks about abstract labor contained in commodities, concrete labor contained in commodities, and he fits this discussion of labor, both at the abstract level and at the concrete level. He fits this discussion within a system of production, within a system of capitalist production that is characterized by the sort of divisions that folks in the 19th century had inherited, characterized by the sort of divisions that we have inherited ourselves in the early 21st century, right? And are patterned by a system of divisions of labor that ensure that capitalism continues to reproduce itself across time and across space. There's something that I wanted to share about this, but I don't want to keep on talking. If you have something that you might want to say.
No, keep going.
All right. Well, there's all kinds of implications as far as this is concerned that are really interesting to me. And the sort of implications that give us an opportunity to shed light and to address things that require attention. I just engaged in a conversation. Some folks might know I engaged in a conversation with a professor from Sacramento State, Cal State University, Sacramento. His name is Manuel Barajas, and he organized a talk last week, Friday of last week, and I interviewed him on Thursday about this particular conference that he organized concerning the subject of farm workers, right? And on one level, one does not necessarily need to turn to academics. One does not need to turn to literature to recognize that work hurts, that there is pain, in the body. One doesn't need to turn to some, third party in order to understand what one is experiencing. What I think is useful about this particular book and books like it is that it helps us to understand how the arthritis, the fever, the torturous circumstances of work under the sun in the summer, out in the fields, for instance, it's within a set of algorithms and gives us an opportunity to see how we might, to use a metaphor, thinking about dominoes, right, where one falls and then all the others begin to fall. If we think about capitalism function in this particular way, that this book and books like it give us an opportunity to remove the domino from, any set of dominoes from the equation so that the dominoes do not continue to fall, and so that we can set up a new system, as it were. Anyway, it was in this discussion that Professor Barajas shared about, the remuneration, the payment, the income of folks by way of their social status. Those who are documented versus those that are not documented. Frankly, those who have a penis versus those that don't have a penis. I mean, that's what it is, right? And so that the payment and the income that is made available to people on the basis of existing social distinctions, are a consequence of all these divisions that reproduce itself and manifest themselves throughout history. And I'd like to, again, like you, I can continue. I can keep on going. So I don't know if you want to say something. But
I would want to say that I think that when we look at this, the questions that we're raising, right, these are questions that exist all throughout the capital system. But when you start taking it down to these questions of culture and these questions of ideas about oneself that permeate this kind of adherence to work and work as a means of survival. And if you don't work, you shouldn't live. Unfortunately, is extremely prevalent in both the Mexican and Mexican American or Chicano or Mexicano versus Chicano, both in the same at the same time. It's huge. It's huge. I mean, if you look at, I remember, and there are material conditions for that. It's not because people just have this in their brain or it's inbuilt or it's genetic or anything like that. But it's they did this study, like the hardest working people in the world, and it was Mexico. I mean, it was Mexico. It was by a wide margin. Yeah. And it permeates the culture, this idea that you should work, and we take pride in our work and we define ourselves by work. But it's this question of always work, even if you're unemployed and looking for a job, and even if people in your immediate whatever around you are sympathetic to the fact that it's a rough job market, they'll still be like, well, you need to volunteer. You need to do something. You can't just sit there. You can't just be there. You can't just be. You have to work, right? And I say this not as an abstraction. I mean, I have 9 interviews today. The compulsion to work is deep. It's deep. This compulsion to be productive. This compulsion to work. It runs very, very deep in our culture. It runs very, very deep in how we pride ourselves and how we define ourselves. And I want to separate the idea of being productive from being exploited, right? Because our desire to be productive in a capitalist system lends itself to hyper exploitation. You know what I'm saying? To work to prove ourselves, working so hard to prove ourselves, but under a condition, but in these conditions that are exploitative to us. So all we're doing is upping the rate of exploitation. That's what we're doing. We're voluntarily increasing the profit margin upon our exploitation. And we as Chicanos, we as Mexicanos, I mean, not every single person, but collectively as a whole, we keep doing this. And it's definitely a problem that we have to confront in order for us to get a real clear grasp of what is happening and why we find ourselves at the bottom of so many pay scales. You know, the women of our community are like some of the least paid workers. I mean, collectively Latinas, so it's not just us, not just our community, but all our communities are the lowest paid workers in the country. But the men are the lowest paid men in the country. So I mean, it's not just the women; it's all of us who are really low paid. But I don't want to negate the fact that the women are paid even less. But like that's the way things are for us in this country, and that's not our fault, and that's not because that's not our fault. I mean that's because of it's because of land theft and because of whatever, and because we enter into the labor force as like the labor force that will allow other labor forces to rise. That's for all kinds of historical reasons that are not our fault, but we have internalized so many ideas about work. You must work, and those ideas within an economy that runs on exploitation is only lending ourselves to be exploited at an even greater rate.
George Garcia and Esteban Mata, welcome. Gilbert Belmontes, welcome to the conversation. I'm reminded of something that, growing up, we would often say to laugh about the fact that we found ourselves in uncomfortable work, to put it lightly or to put it mildly. George Garcia says, el antiguo dicho, el trabajo embrutece, mientras vamos al trabajo. Work makes us brutes. And it's as metaphorical, that particular saying, as it is real, because of course we are identified by our work, we identify with our work, and that work sets patterns of consciousness that we reproduce across time and space. Certainly capitalist work, exploitative as it is, right, certainly makes us brutes if we allow it to do so. And I'm thinking now about finding myself at work growing up and doing some thing that I didn't want to be doing, and folks would come by, my friends would come by, or my neighbors would come by and see that I was doing some kind of work, and I'd say, first name Manuel, last name Labor, right? And we identify, as Chicanos, we identify with these. Some of us do anyway. We identify with the condition of our existence and with the condition of our work. We are proud, when we are not thinking about what we are doing, we are proud to work. I don't. Yeah, go ahead.
And I want to make sure that I'm not saying this is a distinctly Chicano thing. I'm not saying all Chicanos this way either. But collectively, there is a reason why these concepts exist about us, and I can't. It's prevalent in me. It's prevalent in my sister. It's prevalent in my father. It's prevalent. I can go down the line of all these different people that I've known. It's prevalent in you. It's prevalent in. It's prevalent in so many of us, right? It's just there. There's not like a racist stereotype. There's not. This is something that exists in us. And there's reasons, and it's not to say it doesn't exist in other people. It's just to say that there are collectively. This is something that's happening, and in these conditions where we have a community that is overwhelmingly proletariat, and within the context of the broader economy, the proletariat of the proletariat, we need to find a way to not think like this. To not think like this, to not think in terms like this, because it only sets us up for greater and greater levels of exploitation.
Value ability of a particular book. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I want to be careful on how I'm saying. I'm not saying that we are so low paid because we'll take anything or anything like that. We have been thrust and forced into this position.
Yeah.
This is something that's happened independent of our will, against our will. We fought against it. We've fought, for centuries against these conditions. People have fought and died against these conditions. So I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that on a day-to-day level, the workerism that kind of runs through this culture has to be somehow wrestled with, so that it can be used in a liberating way, as opposed to the justification of our own exploitation.
Yeah.
Which is too often the case.
We're at the closing of the hour. I just want to make sure that I acknowledge the folks that have been, participating, and Sanya Juan Ipalnemoa has been sharing a lot of stuff, and I urge people to read. Of course, read what everybody is posting here. San is making references to things outside of this particular reading. He's making references to Fanon, for instance, to Amilcar Cabral, for instance, and to other folks. And I think that one of the things that we were doing as we were I was thinking about other folks as far as, the implications of our work. But I suggest that, we look into some of these citations and that San is making, and draw from them to engage the substance of this and the content of this book, and to call us out if we need to be called out on something, or to highlight and underscore something that we happen to be discussing, or somebody else happens to be, some other comment that somebody else happens to be making. So I thank you for, and of course I'm thanking the folks that have been participating. And Matt,
all right, so I'm gonna share a poem with us. Are we good?
Yeah. Well, we're after 11 o'clock.
Yeah. So we're after 11 o'clock. We're at 57 minutes and 34 seconds. So
okay,
we started at 10.
All right.
So
go ahead.
So I'm gonna share a poem with us. It's not written by me. It's actually written by another guy I know, David A. Romero, who's another guy who's got a 40-hour job, but still finds time to tour the country and write books and put together other people's books and edit other people's books and make memes and work on other people's. So I mean, there's another person who probably works too hard for no reason. Another one of these Mexicans, David A. Romero. He wrote a poem called "You Were Born a Tree." So I want to share. I think that's appropriate for this conversation. You were born a tree. You were born a tree, a tiny seedling in a bustling world, yearning to break free. You were born a tree. Roots behind your growth, branches glowing in the sunlight. You were born a tree. Breathing in the badness of the bustling world, producing something beautiful, bright green leaves, fruit for the future, in a time of deforestation. You were born a tree. Dragged before a machine, first a pile, then arranged single file, line of orders, line of business, line of march. Next, they cut off your arms, which once stretched with hope and promise towards many directions. You were going to be the first veterinarian, astronaut, firefighter, doctor, truck driver, tree. This made all perfect sense to you. You were going to stretch those branches towards the light, but your branches were cut, and the traces sanded down and polished smooth. You were given one direction to grow in. Your designated shape, inches in diameter, thin and uniform, your head affixed with a mind of metal ideas. The kind that makes you think, I know who I am, I know what I am, I have worth, I have value, I like myself because I am a hammer. And it's great to be a hammer because I live in a world of nails, whack, wham, bam. Everything looks one way. You begin to feel hatred and distaste towards anyone who ever suggested that trees were meant to be trees. branches out to the sunlight, make their own green leaves. Those around you no longer beautiful trees. They are tools, purposed. Some kind become shovels, some brooms, some pencils, some scythes, some rulers, some hoes. Some were discarded, never given head at all, never given a head at all in this bustling world. Some are saying one head isn't enough, that this is foolish to affix tools to only one use. They say that tools were meant to resemble pocket knives, a jumble of metal, ugly heads stabbing in all directions, almost like the branches stretching towards the sun. But the more heads and the more tools seems like a fewer and fewer of use, more and more discarded. Some tools question, what do we do? How can we be used? What I wouldn't do for another head, I would break other tools. I am a tool. I have purpose. I am not worthless. Maybe in your desperation, depression, and their condemnations, you have forgotten that you were made a tool, but you were born a tree. Tiny seedling in a bustling world, in this refuse and dirt. Your branches sprout, flimsy and weak, but they can link. You can grow again. You can be whole again. You were born a tree.
Wow. All right. Wow. I was thinking, anyway, I'm not the poet here, so I'll
I didn't write it. I mean, yeah.
That was heavy.
Yeah,
thank you. All right, folks.
Before we go, that was David A. Romero. You should check out his website, davidaromero.com. Support your poets. See, I'm putting in work right now. I mean, get him some work. Get him some work, David A. Romero.
All right. Well. All right. Well, first name Manuel, last name Labor. Otherwise known as Jose Prado and Matt Sedillo. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for joining us.
All right, perfect.
See you next week. And just because we're locked in doesn't mean we have to be locked out. Physical distance, not social distance. Yeah, physical distance, not social distance. See you soon.
Chingon. All right.